So, how long has it been since my River City Girls video? Like 6 months or something? God, I'm slow. But anyway, yeah, River City Girls Zero. This is such a weird release. So, on June 14th, 2021, the same day RCG 2 was first revealed, another game was announced along with it, which was an enhanced 16-bit classic in the form of River City Girls Zero. I stated at the end of my RCG 1 critique video, please go watch that if you haven't, that it's pretty much an official localization of the 1994 Super Famicom game Shin, Nekketsu, Kouha, Kunio-tachi no Banka. But what I said in that video did not do the game justice, and there's a lot more things that I want to talk about. Stuff like the original game itself, how Wayforward handled the localization and release of RCG Zero, and a certain company that had its hand in its development and release that well, let's just start with the actual game. Kunio-tachi no Banka is one of the most interesting games from the Technos era of the Kunio-kun series. It was one of the 3 games directed by the series' original creator, Yoshihisa Kishimoto, the others being Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, or Renegade as it was called in the West, the first ever game in the series, and Shodai Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, which was a direct sequel to Renegade and the first Kunio-kun game to be released on the Super Famicom in 1992. The Downtown Nekketsu series, starting with Downtown Nekketsu Monogatari, was mainly directed by Mitsuhiro Yoshida, may he rest in peace. It's the much bigger portion of the Kunio-kun series, since a lot more of them were made and were put on home consoles, while Kishimoto mostly stuck with making arcade games. With the exceptions of Shodai Kunio-kun and this game, which was released only in Japan on April 29th, 1994. It wasn't made in-house at Technos, however, but instead it was developed by Almanac, which in itself was composed of ex-Technos Japan and Enix employees. The company worked on a good few games when it was founded in 1989 and eventually defunct in 1998. Some of their standout titles include games like Fighting Masters, Evo Search for Eden, and most importantly for this video, Kunio-tachi no Banka. As I said, this game is certainly an interesting one. It's basically Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, but much more story-focused and has way deeper gameplay, since it was on a home console instead of in the arcades. It also has a completely unique art style in both its promotional art and sprite work, which hasn't been replicated ever since this game's release. Unlike the Downtown Nekketsu series, which has had its sprite work reworked and rehashed over the years ever since 1990. I forgot to mention it in my RCG 1 video, but I am so glad the River City Girls games went with a completely different art style compared to every other game in the series. As much as I love games like Tokyo Rumble and Rival Showdown, they're held back by the limited art style of the Downtown Nekketsu games. One of the most recent games in the series, River City Saga 3 Kingdoms, has upgraded the sprites from being limited by the NES's color palette to more of a 16-bit style palette, which does look really nice and it fits better with the detailed 3D backgrounds, but at this point I just want completely new sprite work. Something that isn't rehashed or made to look like its most popular game. This doesn't count. Anyway, what do I think of Kunio-tachi no Banka's art style? Well, the promotional art that was drawn for the box in the manual is amazing. It makes me feel like this game is a mid-90s anime OVA that's part of the Kunio-kun series. The sprite work is a completely different story though. Most of the backgrounds are colorful and have really nice detail, while the character sprites really vary in quality. To put it simply, they look super stiff and awkward. They were even disliked by Techno staff, but Kishimoto was like, nah, this looks fine. Kunio was always meant to have gorilla hands. I do appreciate this game for breaking out of the mold and trying something new with the art style, but man, do the characters look straight up ugly sometimes. Speaking of the characters, you have 4 to play as in this game: Kunio, Riki, Masako, and Kyoko. Gameplay-wise, they're all pretty similar to each other, the main differences being their special moves and their mobility. Kunio and Masako have lunging attacks and while Riki and Kunio have and lightning kicks. The special moves are slightly different between the 4, but they share the same concepts. The girls also run way faster than the boys. One of my favorite aspects of this game is the ability to switch between all 4 of the characters. Not only is it really handy for when you want to handle different kinds of enemies with certain characters, but it's a neat way to conserve health as well. The actual combat itself, however, is a whole nother story. It feels really stiff, like it's trying to break out of its arcade roots, but it just doesn't really know how. Jumping and running feel extremely awkward at times, combos are pretty simple, blocking is one of those kinds of blocks in games that I hate where you only block for like a second instead of being able to hold down the button to keep blocking. I do appreciate being able to stomp on enemies while they're down though. That's something that I feel is essential for beat-em-ups, especially nowadays. It's an extremely useful time saver. The gameplay is something you really gotta get used to if you've played other beat-em-ups before. It's really one of a kind. It's pretty hard too, not because of how challenging the game is, but from how dated it feels. Oh yeah, there's also these motorcycle sections. There's only like 3 of them in the whole game, but they're honestly pretty fun and a nice change of pace. They go on for just the right amount of length to where they don't feel too short or go on for too long. Going on for too long is RCG1's middle name. They're made infinitely more fun by the fact that you can kick biker gang dudes that are chasing you off of their bikes by pressing L and R to kick them off. Yeah, he's gonna be fine. Jokes aside, these are neat and are nice transitions from one location to the next for the game's story. And speaking of which, the story is simple, but also my favorite aspect of the whole game. It starts with Kunio and Riki getting convicted of hit and run and getting thrown into a correctional facility. After beating the shit out of the guys in the cell they were thrown in, Hiroshi then visits the facility to tell Riki and Kunio that both Nekketsu and Hanazono High School have gone to shit thanks to them being locked up for only a couple of days. He also tells the two that people have seen a guy that looks exactly like Kunio. So with the help of their now befriended prison mates, they escape to try to clear their names and find out more about this Kunio lookalike. They then visit Nekketsu and Hanazono High to put them back into order, and Misako and Kyoko team up with them. Thanks to Shinji and the Blue Emperor gang at the amusement park and their secret warehouse in the docks, they find out that the lookalike's name is Ken. While the main 4 are on their journey, Takayama, a police officer and warden of the facility that Kunio and Riki stayed in for a bit, is determined to chase the two down at all costs, until his son Mamoru, who was also a friend of Kunio, tells him that Kunio was actually framed, and he begins investigating. Up until the middle of the game, where Takayama explains to the 4 that Ken is Kunio's long-lost twin brother! No, seriously, Takayama's heard rumors that when Kunio and Ken were born, they were separated at birth, and Ken grew up in an orphanage until he was 16, where the leader of the Sanwa gang and the main villain of the first Kunio-kun game, Sabu, adopts him and claims him as his son. Ken actually committed the hit-and-run accident and framed Kunio by impersonating him. See, these are the kind of stories that I love in beat-em-ups. Anyway, the 4 eventually end up in Shinjuku, where Sabu and Ken are hiding in the second floor of a pachinko parlor, but not before fighting Misuzu! There's a good amount of bosses in this game, but almost all of them are just harder versions of the regular enemies. I cannot say the same for Misuzu, though. She is a fucking powerhouse in this game. Just imagine her fight from Nekketsu Kouha Kunio-kun, but add in some melee-looking-ass wave dashes. In fact, she's such a powerhouse that you fight her twice! And she has a pretty funny side story about how she fights the main 4 to relieve her anger after losing at pachinko, and then becoming Sabu's bodyguard near the end of the game to get her money back from losing said pachinko. To put it simply, Misuzu is precious and should be protected at all costs, though she could probably protect herself just fine. Anyway, once the 4 get to the second floor of the pachinko parlor, they encounter Sabu and Ken. It's here we learn that Ken hates Kunio for living a normal life, while he lived miserably at an orphanage until Sabu adopted him. But the family reunion is cut short as Sabu fucking shoots Misako and Kyoko and then just leaves. What a fucking Chad. Kunio and Riki quickly get the girls out of the parlor, where we see Mamoru and Takayama outside, and they tell them that Sabu and Ken are heading to Izu, which is where Sabu's super secret second mansion is. I mean, he's part of the Yakuza, of course he'd have a second mansion. So Kunio, Riki, Takayama, and Mamoru all drive to Izu to stop Sabu once and for all. Takayama also takes Kyoko and Misako to the hospital as soon as they arrive. Then, while Kunio and Riki are heading to the mansion on a bridge, Kunio burns the bridge down, and we get to hear one of the best compressed screams in video game history. Then the two sail along the burnt bridge, go into a cave that leads to a fucking factory where you gotta do some platforming in a game that has a really jank as hell jump. And then you're just right outside of Sabu's mansion. No, seriously, look at this transition. By the way, these suit guys that look like Rude from Final Fantasy VII can suck my nuts. I hate these assholes and their short knives with stupid-ass hitboxes with all of my soul. Also, if you get sick of fighting these guys like me or any other annoying enemies in the game for that matter, just use Riki and Kyoko's special attack. It does good damage and it's guaranteed to make them fall, so you can get some extra steps in on somebody's body. The two eventually make their way up to Sabu's mansion, not before going down a hole that leads to a dungeon? Is this how every rich person's mansion is? Oh, also, Sabu's mansion has the greatest track in the game. It's so good that Megan McDuffie remixed it for River City Girls. entire OST is just super good in general and is a hidden gem of SNES soundtracks. After getting out of the dungeon, Kunio and Riki go up a few floors, and after taking care of Misuzu's melee tech for a second time, they get to the top floor where they fight Ken himself. After that's done with, we learn that Sabu might be a Chad, but he's a terrible father. After Ken gets shot, he tells Kunio that he isn't actually his brother. So, get this. Sabu adopted Ken just because he looks like Kunio so he could send Kunio to jail by making Ken commit hit and run while impersonating Kunio. All because he wanted revenge for getting his ass kicked in the first game. That is one of the most elaborate revenge plots I've heard in a beat-em-up, hell, video game in general, and I fucking love it. After that lore dump, a self-destruct system that Misuzu actually told them about earlier is activated, and the entire building goes up in flames as soon as Kunio and Riki encounter Sabu in his office. Sabu's not gonna go without a fight though. A pretty unfair fight, however, since he keeps pulling out his gun even though it's keeping him open. After that fight, Kunio and Riki escape the mansion and watch it burn to the ground. Man, this modern take on Castlevania is really weird. Shitty jokes aside, Kunio and Riki's names are cleared and Sabu is presumably defeated for good. Takayama shows up just as they escape and tells them that Kyoko and Misako are gonna be fine. Feeling relieved, the two walk back to Tokyo as the credits roll. And then we see the game loop the intro from the beginning of the game. Oh, never mind. Overall, Kunio-tachi no Banka is a pretty polarizing game to me. While I love the character interaction and the story itself, the gameplay is extremely stiff and dated even for the time. Keep in mind that this came out after Streets of Rage 2, Final Fight 2, and Streets of Rage 3, so the bar was set pretty high for beat-em-ups at the time. But even then, I can still appreciate what the game has to offer and enjoy it for what it is. But I have to ask Wayforward.
What the hell is this?
So, like I said earlier, this is an official localization of Kunio-tachi no Banka, though it also has some bells and whistles like a new animated intro and ending, a manual and 3D model viewer, new manga cutscenes that tie this game into the original River City Girls, and of course, the new official translations. For starters, the animated intro and ending done by David Liu and Future Club are absolutely phenomenal. Liu's art style fits perfectly with Kunio-tachi no Banka's original art style, but also looks different enough to be its own thing. There's songs, of course, to accommodate the opening and ending, both of them being done by Megan McDuffie along with a couple of guests, and they both sound great. Get Ready for the River City Girls in collaboration with Richard Eby not only sounds great, but the lyrics perfectly fit the game itself. Though Mean Street in collaboration with Demon Dice and AO is my personal favorite. It just fits the Kunio series in general really well.
It's who we are, it's the beast I became. Ready to spar with any nice guy or jerk all the same. Could be a game or a lifestyle depending on who views it. Addicted to the beat and I ain't only talking music. Asking us to prove it, well we just did. So don't you give us any lip unless you want to get it busted.
The extras menu has some nice stuff, like being able to view both the opening and ending, the intro and outro manga cutscenes, which I'll talk about in a bit, the useful how to play image, and the image gallery where you can view high quality scans of the game's box art, manual, and even 3D models of the box and the cartridge, which is really cool. I just wish this stuff was actually translated though, because unless you can read Japanese, you'll just have to read very few instances of English and look at the pretty artwork in the manual and box, which again is really nice, but I feel like they only did half a job here. There's some neat things you can do with the game itself, such as being able to save and quit at any time while you're playing, choosing between a variety of different screen sizes and borders. These are the only two correct sizes, let's just make that clear. These are all just regular things that every emulated re-release has, but I really like the detail of your save file showing which location you're in depending on how far you are in the game. I've never seen an emulator be this ambitious, though I wish that ambition could be better spent on sound emulation. The game itself runs just fine, but one thing that stood out to me is that whenever you're playing the game or pause for a good amount of time, the game's audio will start to go out of sync. I don't remember this happening when I played the Switch version when it first came out, but it's pretty apparent in the PC version once you start noticing it. If any of you know of any other port of this game has this issue, please let me know, because I really wish this was patched out already. Also, one more thing about the PC version specifically that I find hilarious is that you can just play RCG Zero straight on another emulator. If you go into the game's files, you can find the ROM files of every single language the game is in, and you can just run these on any SNES emulator. I have no idea if Wayforward or Limited Run even wants people to know about this, but hey, if there's reports of me going missing, you'll know why. Now, when you start a new game, it starts with an RCG-style manga cutscene that explains the story of River City Girls Zero. By the way, I forgot to mention in my RCG 1 video how much I love the casting of Kaylee Mills and Kira Buckland as Masako and Kyoko respectively. They do an incredible job of playing off each other like they're longtime friends.
What's with the blocky graphics? Pixel games are cool again now, don't you know that? Are they? You can be player 2. Like Ricky! Actually, I think we both play as everyone and switch between characters before they die.
What? I don't want to die!
Relax, it's just a video game. Now start kicking bad guy butt.
This is also the first instance of the two being voiced in Japanese, this time with Hanoko Kuroki as Masako and Sumire Morohoshi as Kyoko.
なんというかレトロな画質
ピクセルゲームって言って最近また人気があるんだけど聞いたことない
本当
ほらあんたはプレイヤー2よ
私はもちろんリキちゃん一択
多分だけど一回死んだら他のキャラに交代してプレイする感じだからずっとリキでプレイってわけじゃないみたいよ
じゃあ絶対に死ねないじゃん
落ち着きなよただのゲームなんだからほら悪い奴らを退治しに行くよ
They sound really good together as well, and RCG 2 does have a full Japanese dub, so when I inevitably check out that game, I'll be sure to play it in both English and Japanese to compare the dubs. By the way, the Japanese title of RCG 1 is hilarious.
Shin, Nekketsu Kouha, Kunio-tachi no Banka, with University Girls Extra.
Couldn't have made a more accurate title myself. Anyway, the manga cutscenes basically explain the connection that this game has with the original River City Girls, by having Kyoko and Masako play the game itself thanks to Kyoko buying the console and cartridge for it from Skullmageddon's pawn shop. They flat out say it's about Kyoko and Masako's first adventure with Kunio and Ricky, but they for some reason don't remember it, especially after you beat the game and see the outro cutscene where Kyoko asks a ton of questions like, who was Sabu and Ken? And did they really get shot? I feel like they remember that at least. But Kyoko and Masako just shrug it off, walk away from the console, and go see Kunio and Ricky. The to be continued message makes me believe that these cutscenes will have at least some tie-in to RCG 2. At the time of me making this video, I haven't played it yet, and I'm trying to keep myself away from spoilers as much as possible. But the clear indication about RCG 2 probably even existing in the first place is that Sabu and Ken, along with Sabako, are the main antagonists of RCG 2. So that leaves me with one question. Is River City Girls even canon with the rest of the Kunio-kun games? If so, then that's fine, I guess, but if it's gonna be some kind of multiverse shit, I'm gonna punch a hole in my wall. But one thing that doesn't make me want to punch a hole in my wall are the translations, which are okay, to be honest. The most important selling point of RCG Zero was to indicate that this game has been officially translated, and not just in English. The game can be played in English, French, Spanish, German, Italian, Chinese, Korean, and also includes the original Japanese version. But one point I brought up at the end of my RCG 1 video is that RCG Zero has not one but two English translations, one of them having a similar writing style to RCG 1, while the other tries to be as accurate to the original Japanese script as possible. And honestly, this is an amazing concept, giving the player the option to choose between a translation that has some flavor text, while another that's for those purists that want an accurate translation, and also for people who want to see Kunio call Masako a bitch. Almost everyone in Kunio-tachi no Banka is an asshole to each other, which puts the game's script in that cruel but hilarious category of writing. I should mention some things about both of these translations that irk me a bit. So when the game first came out, the translation that was more in the writing style of RCG 1 was called New, while the translation that tries to be faithful with the original script was called Literal. New was a pretty confusing name, but hey, at least Literal made some sense. But in an update a couple months later, the translation names were changed to RCG and Original, which only switched the confusing nature of their names. There was no, quote, original translation of Kunio-tachi Kunio-tachi no Banka, or at least an official one, until this game came out. Though calling the new translation RCG was an alright choice in my opinion, though in a perfect world they should have just been called RCG and literal. Now, diving a bit deeper into the translations themselves, I think they're pretty alright. I prefer the RCG translation more so than the literal translation, since I think the goofy characterization fits really well for a game with such a ridiculous plot. I did play through the game twice, once with the RCG translation and again for the literal one. The plot points are pretty similar, which is nice, but it's the little things that make them different. Here's a few examples. At the beginning of the game, when Hiroshi visits Kunio and Riki while they're in the facility, he just says hi to Kunio in the RCG one, but in the literal one, he calls him his brother? Even though that's never been established in the series that he's actually Kunio's brother. Hiroshi is Kunio's best friend, so my best guess is that they translated Nakama, which is a Japanese term for friend, as brother, but I don't really have an idea how they messed that up. When you head to Roppongi and encounter Joe and Lisa, Joe is written in the RCG translation as just a tough-sounding guy, while in the original, he's written as if he was the Incredible Hulk or something. This was the only instance I could find where a character's personality changes from translation to translation, and that's really interesting to me. And lastly, when the four get into the amusement park and ride the roller coaster, Misako says something different after the ride is done. In the original, she just says how much fun the ride was, while in RCG, she says, "That was so much fun! No real gameplay difference, but still pretty great." Can you tell Adam Tierney wrote this? I did guess that was the case, but I wasn't sure since he wasn't credited in the localization services section of the credits. I actually DM'd Wayforward on Twitter on who actually worked on the translations, and they said that Haru Shintani Montagna handled the English translation while the final adaptations were done by Adam. Which makes a lot of sense for the RCG translation since Adam was one of the co-writers of the original RCG-1 along with Ben and Rudis. They've stated in interviews and other RCG-related videos that their writing style is full of dad humor.
And by the way, I would say that, you know, not to spoil too much, but that event that just happened is like peak Adam and Bannon humor, where you go through like this gross thing to get keys, and then it's like, oh, those aren't my keys. There's a lot of like very almost kind of like goofy dad humor, I think, in the characters and the logical progression stuff of the game.
Which is really hit and miss with both RCG-1 and especially the RCG translation in this game. When it lands, I definitely get a good laugh, but when it doesn't, it just leaves me with a sigh of frustration. Anyway, I don't want this to turn into a censored gaming video, I just wanted to provide a couple examples of how different both of the English translations are. As for the other translations done by Localized Direct, I have no idea, since I obviously can't read or speak any of these, so if anybody who does could provide some info on these, that would be very appreciated. Also, the original game's credits are just left completely untranslated in all of the translations. It's the same with every other use of text in the game that isn't the dialogue, which is fine there, but I wish there was at least some effort done to give tribute to the original devs. There isn't even a section like that in RCG Zero's credits, which I think would be the perfect opportunity to do something like that, but they just didn't, which feels really off to me. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Gideon Z and the Aeon Genesis team who worked on the original translation of Kunio-tachi no Banka all the way back in
The magnificent far-off year of 2002.
It's pretty crass in a few areas, and the main characters are even more of assholes than the original translation in RCG Zero, but I think if this translation didn't exist, RCG Zero or even the original River City Girls wouldn't even exist. Fan translations are extremely important in the video game industry, especially for old games that never got officially localized back in the day. Overall, River City Girls Zero is a very confusing but I would say necessary release that, despite a few faults, I'm happy even exists at all. It's there for people who played the original River City Girls that wanted to know more about Kyoko Masako's first adventure, and it did a pretty decent job at it. It'll also make people more interested in the rest of the Kunio-kun series, which I'm all for, obviously. If you think this is interesting to you in any way, I'd say go get it. It's available on every modern platform, making it extremely accessible. The Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam versions even have achievements, but there isn't really that much to say about them, honestly. All of the achievements are just for progressing through the game and nothing else. I think the only one you can actually miss is if you ride the roller coaster or not, but aside from that, if you just play through the game once, you'll get all of them. So that means I can proudly put this on my completionist showcase on my Steam profile. One last shout out I should give is Dimitri Giannakis, also known as the Modern Vintage Gamer on YouTube. He was the lead dev of RCG Zero and the Carbon engine, which is what the game itself runs on. His work on this game cannot be understated. He actually made a whole video about the development that I'd highly recommend checking out. I'll put it in the description. He and two other people created created the Carbon engine, which is what RCG Zero and Wayforward's re-release of the original Shantae runs on. And despite a few flaws that I hope get ironed out in future releases, it has a lot of potential to be an amazing emulator for modern platforms. I just wish that this miserable excuse of a company wasn't handling releases that use this engine. For those who somehow don't know at this point, Limited Run Games is a company that primarily handles the physical releases and collector's editions of newer games, old games on newer platforms, and more recently, physical copies of old games. But there is one major problem I have with them, and it's right in the name of their company. Every physical release they do is limited with a varying amount of copies for each release. There's tons of limited releases for games that I think shouldn't even have limited releases, like the game collections Konami put out a couple years ago, or anything they released from Lucasfilm Games. Like you're telling me Disney can afford physical releases of the Disney Classics Games collection, but not games like Knights of the Old Republic and Jedi Outcast? Hey, so Future Chemcurator here. So while I was writing the script for this video, I completely forgot that Jedi Outcast actually does have a proper physical release that you can get right now. The fucking limited run version was already, like, discontinued, like, 2 years ago, but Asper and Lucasfilm Games actually did do a proper physical release of both Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy on one cartridge, thanks to, like, THQ Nordic, and they even did, like, physical copies of a combo pack that has Racer and Republic Commando on it, so, yeah, there actually is a proper physical release for Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, but my point still stands that Lucasfilm and Disney absolutely did have the ability to just do collector's editions of these games by themselves, but they just gave them to Limited Run for some reason, because I guess they wanted to. I have no idea. Also, while I was looking up the physical version of Jedi Outcast on Limited Run's website, I found out that they did this fucking thing. So you can get the collector's edition of Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast on all platforms, and also the standard editions. Like, for some fucking reason, I have no idea, and I pray for, like, the 4 people who still have this on their wish list. All of their collector's edition releases have goodies in them that range from cool stuff like the Mighty Switch Force collection coming with a fake floppy disk USB drive, to dumb shit like Jedi Outcast coming with a book full of retrospective essays about the game. Like, yeah, totally worth the $75 it costs for that. Point is, Limited Run does neat physical releases of games, but just the fact that everything they release is arbitrarily limited makes me not want to get anything from them directly. It also doesn't help that they put out limited releases of games that are extremely rare, like Mega Man The Wily Wars and the original Shantae. Even though they're jacked up to like 20 more bucks on eBay, I'd still rather buy releases secondhand just so I don't have to support them. If you want to know more about why Limited Run is such a terrible company, I'd highly recommend Mr. IXRT's video about them. It goes way more in-depth than I'm willing to in this video. I just want to talk about what they did with the releases of RCG Zero. By the way, when is Plumbers Don't Wear Ties coming out? It's been almost 2 years! So, when River City Girls Zero was first announced, it was originally going to be released in late 2021, with physical releases for both that and RCG Zero being handled by LRG. They already did the physical release of RCG 1, so it made sense that they would handle physical releases for future installments. But just a few months later, Wayforward announced that RCG Zero would be delayed to achieve the most accurate port and best experience possible. Whoa, it's like it was meant to be! Also, most accurate port my ass, the game still has problems that have never been patched. Anyway, the game eventually did come out on Switch on Valentine's Day of 2022, but what about the other console ports in the PC version? Did they release like a couple days later, or maybe like a week later, or a month later or something? They released 7 months later. My only guess for this is because Limited Run wanted to span the releases out for when the physical releases of RCG Zero actually ship. By the way, that's another thing. LRG takes forever to ship anything.
See Outrun, Kenko, what's going on? When did you order the collector's edition for Double Dragon Neon? And how long did it take you to... Oh, man! Okay, good question. I can tell you when I ordered it. I ordered Double Dragon Neon Classic Edition on May 30th, 2021. I ordered it like the same year I ordered No More Heroes Destroy bundle. So I got the No More Heroes one within like that June, July. So that was kind of lengthy. The Double Dragon one, however, oh my God, that was a pain in the ass. I didn't see that one until December, like roughly December like 15th of last year. Mind you, I ordered it back in May of 2021. Got it at the end of like 2022. And Valis, which was supposed to come out in 2022, has not come out yet. So that should answer your question. So Kenka, yeah, that should answer your question right there. I knew it because pre-orders open for, yeah, because pre-orders open around the same time for that. You're right. Also, thanks for the answer, Kyo. It's for research purpose. Nice. Awesome.
Anyway, Wayforward has had a long history with LRG, probably since their inception. They've done physical releases of almost every original Wayforward game you could think of, including the entire Shantae series. They even put out a reproduction cartridge release of the original Shantae, the rarest Game Boy Color game of all time, which is really cool if it wasn't handled by Limited Run. They also did a digital re-release of the game, which was actually the first instance of the Carbon engine being used in something, the second being RCG Zero. It's a pretty impressive release, though I haven't really played it that much to give a solid opinion on the port or the game itself. The collector's edition for RCG Zero isn't anything to write home about. The reversible poster is kinda cool, but one of the sides is literally just a screen cap from the intro, and the action figures look like bootlegs than official figures. But yeah, the release windows for River City Girls Zero are abysmal, and something that I hope doesn't happen with any Wayforward game in general again. And as I'm making this video, that seems to be the case, which is good, but I just wish Wayforward worked with better companies, man. LRG is the main reason why I bought the Japanese physical release of RCG 1 and 2 on Switch. It only costed like $37 on PlayAsia, and then there's LRG selling just River City Girls 2 for $40. Like, get the fuck out of here. So, overall, River City Girls Zero is a very conflicting release. The game itself is one of the most dated beat-em-ups even for the time, the release of RCG Zero being pretty polarizing with the story implications, the localization, and the weird porting issues, LRG holding the release of this game hostage except on Switch for some reason. It's a lot. I honestly wouldn't even recommend this release at all unless you're a big River City Girls fan. If you're a Kunio-kun or River City fan but haven't played this game yet, just go play the Aeon Genesis translation. It's very crass and cheesy in lots of aspects, but it is really the best way to play the game, in my opinion at least. So that's River City Girls Zero dealt with. All that I can say is that next time, it's gonna be fun. Or not. I mean, I hope it's fun. I've been waiting for this game for like 6 months.